what we need to realize, and tying this back to autism, is that this epidemic of narcissism, it loops back into the general context of autism. And what we're going to be looking into, this is the third section of the book, this is the obscurity, and this is the truth part of the book, which is really scary from someone who has a sibling on the autism spectrum and someone who has been affected by this quite tremendously throughout their entire life, my sister and my family by extension, is that we took autism, and autism has slowly been taken over time and chipped away and chipped away and chipped away and chipped away from a medical diagnosis, which it is, it's a disability, which is a medical diagnosis, to a tool of political usage and political elitism. And to that, we turn to a woman by the name of Judy Singer. So, Judy Singer was an Australian woman back in the later part of the 20th century who was initially a computer person, and she wanted to study like the way just systems and computers and technology and things like that, which is fine. And so she wanted to study computers initially, and she kind of stumbled upon, the works of the early days of autism and disability research. And so she ends up going into the early days of online internet forums and talking about autism with people online. There were kind of these blog, instant messaging chat rooms, these with thousands of people inside of it saying, I just quote unquote discovered my autism, which basically, says autism is no longer defined by a medical professional. It can now, like everything, be self-diagnosed. And so she wrote a very, very interesting paper, and I think the defining paper of autism research in the modern era. It's now called, it was republished into a book, which is what I read, called Neurodiversity, the Birth of an Idea. And she initially published as a scientific paper in the 1990s called Odd People In. That was what her paper that she wrote on. And she coined the term neurodiversity. If you are a top-performing, high-earning man in a corporate job, I have a free gift for you, the Value Economist Handbook. In this book, you'll find a bulletproof, crystal clear, and step-by-step roadmap to build your values, systematize them into an unbeatable portfolio, and leverage them to create an unshakable identity that leads to fulfillment, meaning, and purpose. So, if you want a free copy, go down to the description below, fill out your information, and we'll send one over to you right away. Now, let's get back to today's video. If you want to know where that term came from, look at Judy Singer. That was the person who eventually invented the term. And she also invented and popularized the term called the spectrum, quote unquote, which if you look at those two words, those are the two words more than anything else now today that define modern autism. When you think of neurodiversity, when you think of the spectrum, you automatically think of autism. And, I don't blame people for that because it's very, very popularly distributed. So what this did, however, and this is what makes Judy Singer, in my opinion, a villain and such a despicable person in many ways, is that it watered down autism. It took it away from the medical. It did not make it a serious thing anymore. Because if you could just say that you could be a random plot on the line on the quote-unquote autism spectrum, which no one can define, and you can say, well, I have this trait and I have this trait, I have I should be this person. That's like kind of saying, this might be a very crude example, but saying, well, I like tacos, so I can identify as a Latino person. Or, I have, I don't know, what's a white person thing that we do? I like to dance awkwardly at weddings, or I dance awkwardly at weddings, so I identify as a white person. That might be true, but that would be absurd if you were to make that big of a leap. I have a certain trait where I like to analyze thoughts more, or I have dysregulated emotions. So now I'm autism, or now I have autism. That's a bit of a stretch, I think. And it is a stretch, and it's absurd, and it's ridiculous, but it wasn't anymore because of the work by Judy Singer. So what she did and the damage that this woman did is unfathomable when you look at all of this stuff, when you really look at it from the abstract. It took autism from no longer a medical diagnosis, but it turned it into a political cause. And more specifically, to tie it back to Carl Truman, it turned it into an identity, which is really scary. And this led to the beginnings of, like I said, the spectrum, neurodiversity, and basically it made something that was biological, medical, diagnosable, firm, founded in fact, and blew it up. And it turned it into an inherently obscure thing, which has allowed people with no credentials and people who are opportunists to take advantage of it for their own personal benefit and gain. Now, This is not saying that quote unquote experts are the only ones that need to have an opinion on autism. I don't have a degree in anything related to the medical field or related to autism. I still wrote a book about it. And I hope more people write books about this. I hope more people talk about this and talk about a lot of things. And this inherent reliance on expertise, I'm glad that it's breaking away, not because I don't like actual experts, but because I believe in diversity of thought. And I believe in people actually coming in and having a stance where they might not have the college degree. They may not have this or that, but they might be very well read. They might be very smart. They might be just a naturally intuitive person. There are still those that exist out there. At least I think there are. And so what happened is that it took a lot of people, it blew up autism and allowed a lot of people to hijack it and to take it into their own personal gain and benefit, which leads to what I have dubbed the creation of what I'm calling the autism industrial complex. So you might have heard about the military industrial complex before. I am now defining a new complex, which is called the autism industrial complex. So the autism industrial complex is largely what has resulted from this entire movement of this opportunistic grifting to the autism space and the autism problem and the autism disability. So these are giant institutional actors, like when if you buy Spectrum of Lies, if you buy the book when it comes out, your jaw will drop when you find out who is involved with this and how corrupt these institutions are. So these are institutions which are all now certainly like this, but specifically in relation to autism, that are now completely captured by expressive individualism, completely captured by it. And so what they're doing is they're mainlining this new version of autism while shifting the old ones. So you'll hear about the medical system, corporate America, school boards, all this stuff. Everything is now up for negotiation. And the people that controlled the narrative around autism all spun it in the direction of Judy Singer, not in the direction of actual medical autism, which is what people lead into. And I mean, I hope you can see, and I'm appalled whenever this is probably the most jaw-dropping section of the entire book, because even when I was doing my research in this, I found things that I said, there's no way this can possibly be true. There's no way that things are this corrupt, that things are this broken, that things are this messed up and screwed up and this disenfranchising to autistic people. But they are, unfortunately. And that's something we have to deal with and contend with. And so what happened after this whole movement from moving autism to the medical to the political is things got real crazy real quick, because that also happened with a lot of other causes.